Amy.
Hi, Matt. How are you?
I'm good. Biggest complaints recently have been about the sort of appalling heat, so I guess I'm doing pretty well.
Yeah, well, I just heard from a friend who got back from Sweden, and it was 95 degrees there.
Really?
So maybe Al is on to something.
Huh. Yeah, I mean, last summer I managed to take refuge for a week or so in Iceland for a little while. And it was like 40 over there.
Yee. I don't know if that's good for summer vacation, but...
No. Well, I hadn't actually realized that, and I kind of stepped off the plane in, like, a T-shirt, and had to buy a lot of clothes.
Right. Well, you pick up good sweaters over there, I hear.
Yeah, no, exactly. I don't know. D.C. seems like possibly the worst weather city on Earth.
It's possible, although, I don't know. I think the winters make up for it.
The mild winter?
Yeah.
There's something to be said for that.
Better than Boston.
Yeah, no, that's true. I guess I'm more in favor of it being too cold than too hot.
All right. Well, I can go along with that.
Sure. Speaking of hot...
That's a nice transition.
Yes, there's something of a war seems to have broken out in the Levant area, I think is what we call it. Israel and Hezbollah shooting at each other. Lebanese government sort of caught in the middle, pleading for people to stop shooting at them, I guess. Bush administration seemingly disengaged from events. Well, you were just saying that you were in Israel recently, right?
Yeah, it was about a month and a half ago, and we spent a fair amount of time up in the north.
Mm-hmm.
And so, this past couple of weeks kind of brings home to you how fine a line it is between, oh, hey, that's Lebanon over there, that's kind of cool, and, oh, holy crap, that's Lebanon. They can shoot rockets from there and hit this town.
Well, that's actually a good question. I mean, because, one of the things you read a lot about here is that, though obviously it was this Hezbollah attack on some Israeli soldiers that, prompted the current round of fighting. People have been emphasizing that Hezbollah has been on and off again shooting these missiles for across the border for quite some time. And I mean, I don't know if you had a sense of this when you were up there, but I mean, how was that really a terrorizing thing? Did people really worry a lot about these missiles?
I mean, to some extent, it's just something that Israelis are used to.
Right.
And so the weird thing is to talk to people who are just kind of so maybe, I don't know that they're blasé about it, but it's just something they have to factor into their daily existence. I mean, I certainly didn't tell my parents that we went to Israel until we got back safely. Because I think there's always enough of an ongoing risk. You worry about it. But, we were up hiking around the Golan Heights. And again, Syria's 5 miles away, and didn't really think about it. You're just hanging out at a winery, and, oh, there's Syria. But you get a much better sense, or at least I did once I saw the geography, of why Israel's so concerned about who controls what pieces of land.
Right.
Because if you've got the high ground, it doesn't take much to just lob a rocket down into the Galilee, into the valley.
That's what they say, and I actually recently, I was supposed to go, or I thought I wasn't supposed to go on a birthright Israel trip.
Oh,
this
right.
is if you're Jewish, you get basically a free trip to Israel if you haven't gone before. But there was some kind of miscommunication, and I thought they told me that there wasn't space for me and I should go next year. And then I actually got a call from one of the organizers saying he was at the airport and my flight was supposed to leave in half an hour, and where was I? And I sort of couldn't make it out there in time, and now I'm on their shit list, I think, and I'm not going to get my free trip.
Now you're never getting your free trip, yeah.
Yeah, so obviously, as a result of that, I've now, instead of being imbued with the deep appreciation for the geography of the situation, I've become bitter, and I'm adopting my political views basically just to because I feel that I've been cheated out of my trip.
That makes so much more sense now.
Sure. But, I mean, in all seriousness, I don't want to get too high dudgeon-y about it, because I think people often get over the top when they talk about Israel. But I don't actually understand what they think is going to be accomplished by this turn of events. Tim Kavanaugh had a good, I think, non-shrill piece published in Reason, just sort of laying this out. What is it they think they're going to achieve here?
What is it Israel thinks they're going to achieve?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Well, I don't think they set out. Obviously, they see this as a reaction to a provocation from Hezbollah. And so I'm not sure they went into it thinking they were going to achieve anything other than make sure this group that's right on their border and feels like it can lob missiles at them with impunity doesn't feel that way anymore.
Sure. I mean, but I mean, that said, I mean, the reason Hezbollah came to be right at the Israeli border is that for many years Israel was maintaining control over a sort of strip of South Lebanon to keep Hezbollah off the border.
Right.
But Israel was fighting with Hezbollah for years there, which was a situation that arose because Israel had gone into Lebanon previously to get a different terrorist organization out of South Lebanon.
Right, but again, to protect their border and to make sure that their citizens could live in the northern third
Right.
of the country without, being at risk. And I think, this is all kind of part and parcel of the same thing. David Brooks actually had an op-ed on Sunday that I quite agreed with on this, that what we're talking about is different than focusing on what the Palestinians have done, or what the Israelis have done with the Palestinians. I mean, that certainly is an important political question, but that's somewhat separate from what's going on right now. And a lot of the commentary, at least on the left, I think, has not necessarily distinguished between those two.
Yeah, no, I mean, I agree with that. I mean, I think people don't appreciate the extent to which Hezbollah is its own issue, and there's no... I mean, the nominal disagreement between Israel and the government of Lebanon is this thing about the Shabbat farms, which is very minor, and where basically everyone who's looked at it calmly seems to think Israel's in the right. But, which was just to say, though, that while it seems totally reasonable that given a terrorist organization on your northern border that was every once in a while firing rockets into your territory and that then came across the border, killed some soldiers, took two of them prisoner, that you would want to get rid of them if you could. But that Israel has actually tried this before. I mean, if dismantling the Hezbollah military infrastructure were just a matter of sort of calling up the general and saying, let's go do it, Israel would have done this a long time ago. And so, and then they're doing, in addition to the sort of direct attacks on rockets and so forth, they've been attacking a lot of the civilian infrastructure of Lebanon in what I guess an effort to pressure the Lebanese government to crack down on Hezbollah. But I don't find anyone who thinks the Lebanese government actually has the capacity to do that.
They may not be able to, but what's different now from past incidents where the Israeli army has been trying to kind of crush Hezbollah is that Hezbollah is part of the Lebanese government now. And, it may be that most Lebanese don't have the ability to root out Hezbollah. But the problem remains that they are part of the official structure now. And that's a different political question than what they've dealt with before.
Right.
And, there was a piece on Slate, I'm forgetting who wrote this a couple of days ago, that points out that there's been kind of, passivity among a lot of the Lebanese civilians of, Hezbollah's here, but, what are we supposed to do about it?
Right.
And you raise a good question. Maybe there isn't anything they can literally do to push Hezbollah out of the country. But this is one of the ways that you get a country to stop harboring terrorists, is to make it not in their interests. If it's just kind of a neutral, well, we could take them or leave them we kind of wish they were gone, but it doesn't hurt us that much, then it's a completely different matter in terms of scale. Then this is having a serious, awful impact on us to let these people live within our borders.
But I mean, by destroying their power plants and roads and ports, I mean, I thought it was interesting. I looked this morning on the New Republic's website, where obviously they tend toward a supportive view of Israel, and there was a piece up there by Michael Walzer, the philosopher who does just war theory, and the whole framing of the piece and the main emphasis of it was to say, why Israel was justified in acting, which I agreed with him on, and so on and so forth. But in the piece, as a relatively minor sort of element of it, he observes that this business of targeting the civilian infrastructure is, in his view, illegitimate, which, he didn't make a big deal out of it. But to me, it seems like a big deal. I mean, it was, I guess good for them for publishing it. I was surprised to read that in that publication. But it's something that I think hasn't gotten a lot of attention in the United States. I've seen a lot of sort of defenses of the idea of Israel taking military action that don't quite come to grips with exactly what the nature of this action is, and that it's something that's normally been considered an illegitimate, way to respond.
Well, I mean, one of the problems is that this is it is perhaps one of those debates that people have had so long that they just can't bring themselves to bring it up again. Because of the fact that the leadership of Hezbollah consciously builds their headquarters and houses themselves in civilian areas. That it's not a coincidence. They know what they're doing. And, this is something way back in, I guess, the late 80s, early 90s. I was a complete dork in high school and in Model UN for a good 4 years. And played Israel a number of times. And it seems like this is the exact same debate that we had then. It's the debate that they had 10 years before that. And it doesn't mean that it's not important, but it seems to be one of those there's no good solution questions.
But, I mean, I just want to draw a distinction. I mean, one thing is the question of you strike at a military target, which has been sort of embedded in a civilian area, which is something that Hezbollah certainly does. A lot of groups have started doing. And, that's the sort of the double effect question in kind of, I guess, Catholic just war teaching that a lot of people have taken up. But then there's a separate issue, which is blowing up, like, the Beirut power plant, where it's not that they hit the power plant accidentally because Hezbollah put missiles next to it and, their aim was off. They meant to blow up the power plant, the airport, the fuel depots around there. And that, I think, is a less hard question. I mean, I just got an indignant email from someone or other sort of listing what kinds of things other countries have done in the course of counterinsurgency or in the name of counterterrorism. And it's quite true that this is, not at the level of, like, when Syria slaughtered tens of thousands of people to crack down on the Muslim Brotherhood. But, still, it seems to me, they're still right and wrong, even if other people are worse.
Yeah, no, I take your point on that. And you do have to kind of go target by target, which is tough to figure out, okay, well, this one was okay, and you can understand why they blew up and targeted some transportation areas, whether it's the airport or the bridges or the roads, because they don't want the Israeli soldiers being taken to Iran. Whether or not that hurts the civilians way more than it impacts the ability to take soldiers who may or may not be alive out of the country. That's tough.
Right. Well, and then I guess, there's a question of solutions. Most of the Western governments, I guess, at this point, have lined up behind the idea of trying to send an international peacekeeping force down there. That's what the government of Lebanon has asked to have happen. The Bush administration so far has not, I mean, I guess the way that would work out is that if the Bush administration got on board for that plan, they would sort of twist Israel's arm and get them to agree. But so far, neither the Israelis nor the American government wants to do it. But I feel like at least there's been some indication that the Israelis actually do think that will be the resolution here and are prepared to accept that.
Right.
But they want time to take out more
Hezbollah
stuff
this is their
first.
chance to destroy Hezbollah as thoroughly as they can. And maybe their thinking is we can't completely get rid of them, but we can really diminish their capability to hurt us.
Right. And that, to me, I mean, if that's really what it is they're trying to do, I mean, it's on this weird, to me, dividing line between totally understandable and slightly appalling. I see why they would want to do that, but on the other hand, the idea that they are sort of continuing fighting in which, a lot of people are dying when there's a possible basis for peace on the table, and that they actually intend to accept that agreement at some point, but just, not until this has gone on for a few more weeks and, we're at maybe 1,000 dead people instead of 200 is, I don't know, it doesn't sit well.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of domestic politics going on there, too.
Right. That makes sense.
They feel like they did what people asked them to. They withdrew from territories, and now for their thanks, they're getting attacked. And so, to appease some people, they're going to need to be involved with this for a certain amount of time. But, hopefully a week from now, we'll be talking about an agreement to end it.
And then, well, I guess perhaps we should move on. It's been
the next happy topic.
Pushed out of the headlines somewhat, but actually the situation in Iraq is, if anything, both worse than it was in Iraq before, and arguably is actually more deadly at this point than
is it
anything.
100 deaths a day now?
What?
I think it's up to 100 deaths a day.
Right.
Or more.
Which is a lot. And I guess arguably
that's
should
war.
still be the headline story.
Yeah, I know Ryan Lizza has been blogging, all the stories that are on the back pages, or certainly below the fold about Iraqi death tolls.
Right. I mean, I guess, the thinking in terms of emphasizing the Israel and Lebanon story is that seems to have more of a potential of like spiraling out of control, in a broader regional sense, whereas Iraq, I guess the press, the country has maybe reconciled itself to the idea that there's going to be a sort of medium level bloody fiasco unfolding there.
Right. Well, and we're also in this weird position, right, where it clearly to people on the ground is a civil war. And there are a lot of observers who have recognized that this is a civil war.
Right.
But the administration and a lot of their political allies are not going to call it that yet. So what we have is what we've had before, just worse. And we don't have kind of the frame in which to talk about it as, no, this is a slightly different animal, and you need to have different plans for how to deal with this.
Right.
And this is the frightening thing, is that we've never really had a good end game. And we still, 4 years later? 3-4 years later? Don't appear to know how to get out of this.
No.
I guess assumed, even, in my naive little political way, that there was at least a office over in the Pentagon where people were coming up with plans.
Right, sure.
But indeed, it appears not to be.
Yes. No, the thing is, for a long time now, I've been trying to make the case that if we were to withdraw our troops, that would, in a lot of ways, promote Sunni-Shiite reconciliation and laid the best possible strategy for avoiding a total meltdown down the road. And unfortunately, I think we have passed the point where I can actually argue that in good faith. There's been enough fighting at this point, pretty clearly, that, it's taken on a life of its own. That people whose initial impetus to take up arms was that they were against the occupation and against people who were collaborating with the occupation.
Right.
Now
they
have
against each other.
Plenty of perfectly authentic anti-Shiite feeling based on, militias and death squads, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. But I guess I still think we should leave because I don't see what staying achieves at this point.
Yeah, well, you either double or triple your force to try to put down the violence,
right,
or you withdraw completely. Because if you pull people out slowly, those poor guys who are left in the last remnants are just sitting ducks.
Right. No, I agree with that. That's a good point. I think that hasn't gotten a lot of enough attention. Right. If you look at the sort of from a couple weeks ago when they were debating this in the Senate, all the different competing Democratic proposals invariably sort of envision a gradual withdrawal of people, which just seems logistically, terrible. You might say...
Yeah, it's probably the right political proposal because they don't want to freak people out, but logistically, it's awful.
Right. You might say, okay, we're not going to leave immediately. We're going to leave 6 months from now. But that would mean nobody would leave. And then in 6 months, everyone needs to leave very suddenly.
Yeah, but that brings up kind of the newsreels from Vietnam. And that is the one thing, stubbornly, that the administration wants to avoid, even though it's probably the best way to protect your remaining troops is to pull them all out at the same time.
Right. Right. I guess because it looks like panic and weakness. And I guess in truth at this point it would be.
It would be. Well, yeah, but, now it's justified.
Right. No, I guess that's the thing. There is this sort of, there's this conservative narrative about the need to show strength and determination and will and so on and so forth. But, sometimes...
It's done a hell of a job for us so far.
Right. Well, and also, right. Sometimes the correct response to a situation is to panic. Right? Especially since nobody... the administration's even past the point of, issuing these little victory strategies now.
Yeah. Well, did you see there was it was Bush's comments at the end of the G8 meeting where he was talking about Russia. And he kind of did a little dig at Putin saying, I hope that he embraces some, democratic characteristics, like free press and freedom of religion like they have in Iraq now. And Putin came up for his time and was like, with all due respect, I don't think we want the kind of a democracy they have in Iraq. That's not looking that good right now. But,
well, in Bush's defense, I do think the
in
press is freer in Iraq than in Russia.
Okay. But
that's
not going to make you safe at night.
Sure. Yeah. Okay. Well, so that's depressing.
Yes.
Iraq. Stem cells, on the other hand, are...
I'm back to domestic politics, yes.
Seemingly,
it's also depressing.
Well, from a liberal perspective, good stuff seems to be happening, right? Bills are getting passed. The president, I guess, is going to
veto them.
Give his first ever veto, and the Democrats have succeeded in backing him into making his first ever veto an issue where the majority is clearly against him.
Yeah. And, maybe you have some ideas about why it is that he's going to do that. Because, I think the administration's had a pretty tin ear when it comes to foreign policy. But on domestic policy, they usually have some pulling to back them up. Or they're doing something that they think is going to really help them, at least with one part of their base, even if they're against the wishes of the majority of Americans.
Right.
But I have to say,
and notwithstanding the president's sort of deserved reputation for stubbornness, this kind of thing where there's been a bill which he and his allies fought in Congress but then eventually passed has happened before with the McCain-Feingold, with Homeland Security.
Yeah.
And he's always found he's either just backed down flip-flopped or found some really kind of clever, jujitsu, as he did with the Homeland Security bill. Never just sort of gotten himself clearly on the wrong side of an issue with a veto. You can only assume it's because he feels like the only people left supporting him at this point are the really hardcore base, and that, moderate voters who he's lost aren't going to come swinging back just if he signs the stem cell bill, whereas he's going to alienate, most of the people who are supporting
But I guess
him.
my question is, why does he have to worry about the base? I mean, if you look at the senators who voted for the stem cell bill, all the Republicans who we're assuming are going to run in 2008 voted for it. So they've obviously made their determination that this is something either that the base is behind or that the base isn't going to hurt them over it.
Right.
So I just come back to not understanding why this is something that Bush has decided to embrace. And, I don't like to get too far into what some other people have in, describing Bush as just totally in a bubble and not getting outside advice. But you do have to wonder, I mean, it turns out now that when he gave that first stem cell speech in 2001 and said, there are 20-some existing lines or something, that was a lie.
Right.
It was just a complete and flat out, I mean, maybe it's not a lie if you didn't know it was true, but it turns out now not true at all. And there's not a lot of debate over that. And yet he continues to still be acting with information that is no longer true.
Right. Although, I'll say this. He's definitely acting with information that's no longer true. One possible, sort of political rationale I can think of here, and this, it gets into your area primarily, but it's just that Bush thinks that the basic political dynamic around religion and public policy favors him and favors the Republican Party, and being sort of consistently and squarely on, I guess the side of faith or whatever, even when on the specific issue it's not, the poll doesn't go his way, that it still just tends to sort of sharpen the differences between the parties on this regard and promote, a dynamic of polarization that doesn't that polarizes the population unevenly in a way that favors conservatives.
But it's hard to say on this issue that there's a religious side and there's a non-religious side. I mean, there are certainly religious groups that have spoken out against stem cell research, and probably the Catholic Church is the biggest institution that has said, look, there's no question.
Right.
We know when life begins, and we're not straying from that. But, I just got a press release from the Orthodox Union that represents the Orthodox Jewish community. And they're very supportive of the bill. They have asked the president not to veto it, to let it go through. This is a really big issue for them. Mormons are supportive of stem cell research.
Right.
So it's not necessarily even being conservative and being religious that makes you opposed to stem cell research. What it does is kind of show how it's not fringe, because there's still a large percentage of Americans who oppose it. But it is a fairly extreme position. It's the same if you look at, the number of Americans who oppose birth control. You're talking about a fairly small number there.
Right.
And I think it just puts the Republican Party, or at least this president, in the bad position of aligning himself with a fairly small group of people against a growing number. And that's what's interesting, is the more people learn about stem cell research, the more supportive of it they are. This is not something that is trending his way. Right.
I mean, I did see, I saw this snippet of something Chuck Schumer said on the Senate floor during the stem cell debate, which struck me as almost snatching defeat from the jaws of victory here for Democrats, where he starts out saying how much he respects people of deep religious faith, and he goes to inner city black churches and Methodist churches upstate, and synagogues and blah blah blah, religion. It's all great, but that the problem is that there's a certain number of people in this country who are theocrats, who what they want to do is have their religious beliefs determine public policy.
Wow.
And that's
Somebody's
the
been
problem
reading Kevin Phillips.
with these opponents of stem cell research. And it seemed to me that he went from an issue where the overwhelming majority of people were going to agree with him,
Right.
which was,
Just
should there
pissing
be
off.
federal funding for
Yes.
stem cells, to an issue where actually most people are on the other side, which
Yes,
is,
yeah.
should you let your religious beliefs, if not strictly dictate, at least inform what you think about politics.
Well, that's a fantastic example. I'm glad you told me about that. That goes in the book.
Okay. Well, there you have it. Yeah, and anyways, it struck me as an odd thing to say, because I was an intern one summer in Chuck Schumer's office in New York, and he really does go to black churches
Oh, I'm sure
very
he does.
frequently when he's in the city. And obviously the reason he does that is because the people in those congregations who are loyal political supporters of his and an important part of his constituency are determining their political beliefs in part on the basis of the things they hear in church. That's
Right.
why a senator would go to all the churches.
Right.
Right. And obviously, people don't, I don't know. It's something liberals, don't think through enough. If that's even something they really believe, much less whether it's something it's advisable to say.
Something they really believe, that people shouldn't have their religious beliefs influence their political beliefs.
Right. I mean,
Because that's
I
exactly
feel
what
like
they've been saying with Jim Wallace and poverty and the environment. I mean, they're very happy to glom onto those issues that they've always supported and say, well, absolutely, we welcome religious people who've come to this as well because of their religious beliefs. But then you don't get to turn around on issues where you don't like the outcome of religious influence and say, well, that's bad, we can't have any of that because that's a theocracy.
Right. I mean, exactly. I mean, you do get to turn around and say, well, this time I disagree with you. I think
Yes.
the position you're taking on
But-
this issue is wrong. But right, I mean, to move to this weird process critique where when someone gives a religious reason for doing something liberal, everyone's like, great. But then when they
Yeah.
give a religious reason for doing something that you think is wrong, to not just say, well, no, you're wrong, and here's my reasons why, but to say that, second order, well, no, now you're not allowed to quote the Bible. I mean, it doesn't make sense.
It's a very narrow argument that's been going on, among people who read Kevin Phillips' book and Michelle Goldberg's book, both of which are useful. But the idea that you'd say that on the Senate floor and think you're engaging most of the people who are watching you is a little bizarre.
Sure, right. I mean, and it's especially weird because it's introduced with this thing, which is clearly, I think, like a bumbling effort to do the whole
I don't
I
hate
get
religious
Christianity thing.
Yeah.
But then he just totally botched it.
Well, that would be our Democrats for you.
Right. Okay, so, well, I guess there wasn't tons of feisty disagreement about that.
Yes,
But
this is the
elsewhere,
problem when we debate
in the faith-based world, I guess this is the ostensible reason why
Suppose it was
the House of
coming
Representatives
from,
is banning internet gambling, and the Senate, it looks like, may follow suit.
This is an interesting case of timing because internet gambling and trying to outlaw it is something that Republicans have been talking about for 6, 7, 8 years. I mean, as long as the internet has existed and there have been gambling sites. And it was certainly something Bush brought up a lot in his first campaign. But I bet you if we hadn't had the Abramoff scandal and the kind of public dissing of religious groups or, using them to back gambling initiatives that they are very morally opposed to, I don't think we'd be seeing both a law to outlaw this and the administration really cracking down on internet gambling sites. I think they have been embarrassed by this, and they think this is possibly one way to get back in the good graces of some conservative Christians who are very opposed to gambling.
Right. I mean, it's an interesting thing, though, because what the whole reason conservative Christian groups and people sort of wound up getting caught up in the scandal about this is that when you look at, anti-gambling initiatives, one group of people who tends to be against, offshore internet gambling is, religiously motivated gambling opponents. But the other main group who's against internet gambling is people who own casinos.
Okay.
Which is exactly what makes it a kind of strange, a strange bedfellows kind of thing. And also just in policy terms, it seems very strange to me to be in this kind of middle ground where, the country clearly hasn't made the decision that gambling is categorically wrong and should be banned. There's tons and tons of legal gambling. You can go to Atlantic City, you can go to these Indian places, you can go to Las Vegas, you can play the lottery, which will be run by the government.
Right. And in fact, they've been expanding. It's not like, we've been pushing back gambling and this is just the next step.
Wait, what was that?
Well, it's not as if we have been on a trend of pushing back gambling, closing down, horse tracks or casinos or lottery programs.
Right. Except now we are apparently.
But it's this one area, and I think you put your finger on it that this is a coalition of a way to appease some people in the base who are maybe a little ticked off about the Abramoff stuff, and a way to make some Republican supporters happy at the same time. The casino owners.
Right, or Harry Reid supporters.
Right.
Or whoever they may be supporting. Obviously Democrats are never influenced by corporate contributions in their stances. It's the clean hands party, as we well know. I also don't... I don't know. I had always assumed that it actually wouldn't be feasible to ban internet gambling because of something about how the internet worked. That's evidently not the case, which also makes me wonder, a lot of people, including, Bob, who sort of got this whole BloggingHeads thing rolling, like to say that, the spread of the internet is going to, bring the blessings of freedom all around the world, because information and so on and so forth. But if really the Congress can just say, no, you can't use these gambling websites and effectively enforce that, it seems to me to really call into question, not that the availability of internet gambling goes to the core of human freedom, but if it's actually that easy to ban a whole category of online activity, then it seems like the internet is much less liberatory than.
And that's going to be a really interesting debate because this appears to be a 1-2 punch. It's not just, all right, well, we pass this bill and, we do stuff like this, like voting on flag burning all the time to try to send a message that we hope, it brings political dividends without having to do anything. Now they're going out and they're arresting people.
Right.
And that sends a pretty vague message.
Yes.
It should frighten people who have stakes in lots of areas on the internet, not just internet gambling.
Right. And also, I don't know, maybe I'm wrong, but I haven't actually been feeling like people's lives are being devastated by betting on sports on the internet or something. I think Isaac, who does some of the technical work here, may have had his life ruined because he helped me put a bet on the Wizards Cavs series, and I couldn't figure out how to do it. And since the Wizards lost, I think I owe him $50 that I hadn't paid him. Which I probably should. But other than that, everyone seems to come out. At least be doing okay.
Well, I've certainly known people whose lives have been devastated by gambling.
Right.
It wasn't necessarily on the internet, and I guess the argument is that the internet makes it so much easier to just lose money hand over fist. But that's a separate argument. That's a gambling-wide argument, and it's not even a morality thing. It's so much as almost a public health problem.
Right. Well, and I mean, it seemed to me, at least, that I mean, part of the oddity of this sort of gray status of gambling in America is that if you're like a hardcore, gambling addict, if you have a serious gambling problem, which many people do, it's like hardly impossible to find places to gamble. Right, we're not like effectively shutting that down. I mean,
right.
the people who are being seriously impeded from gambling by this sort of thing are people who like aren't that serious about gambling, and might do it from the comfort of their own home, but don't feel like compelled to organize their lives around it. I mean, maybe that's wrong. Maybe there'll be orders of magnitude more gambling addicts if it's easier to start. I guess I should try and find some facts before I. That's what you said on the panel, right?
Facts totally unnecessary.
Totally unnecessary.
Stephen Colbert. Yeah. Yeah.
You know.
It's all your gut. What does your gut tell you about this?
Right. Yes, my gut tells me that it's not all that serious a problem, and it could all be left alone.
Okay. Well, that will be our one area of disagreement in this entire BloggingHeads episode.
Okay, that's good.
I feel kind of sorry for the viewers who have seen not a debate, but yes, you're quite right.
Yeah, no, okay. Well, maybe we should find something to viciously disagree about. I'll actually say this. I feel like the premise that is often undertaken that every BloggingHeads episode needs to feature, sharp, pointed disagreement, maybe sort of wrong. I mean, that's like. The cable TV, right? I mean, that's like the stupid format that they always use on all those shows. Is like, here's from the left, here's from the right, and now everyone needs to disagree about everything. And I think that's part of the reason, like, people in the world feel like the country is so divided and everything's so contentious, when, like, evidence suggests that disagreement is not all that widespread about many
or
things.
That it's much more nuanced,
right.
And it tends to be shades of gray in the middle, which I think lead, you're right, to much more interesting discussions, because you're not just lobbing talking points at each other from your very far corners, but you're actually dealing with setting aside the things you do agree on and then getting at those very tricky remaining questions.
Right, but see, now this is bad. I was trying to provoke meta-disagreement about the need for disagreement, and now we're once again reaching a nuanced middle ground, and that may be a problem. I think we're too reasonable, and we need to find some more kind of bomb thrower.
We could just keep it this all afternoon.
Types out there. What?
We could just keep this up all afternoon.
I guess. Yeah. No. Well, it's disappointing. But I guess maybe we should wrap things up. Make this a briefish episode if it's too dully agreeable.
Has it been brief?
What?
I don't mean to imply that this has been just long.
Excruciating? No. Okay. I tend to do long ones because I talk too much. I guess other people. Yeah. All right. You're right.
I have to plead. I came down with strep throat this morning, so
really?
My talking ability is kind of
fair enough
constrained today.
All right. Well, let's say goodbye then.
So we'll plead sick leave. Yeah.
Feel better.
All right. Well, thank you.
Great.
It's been a pleasure.
Excellent. Bye.
All right. I'll talk to you later.